I had an honor bestowed on me yesterday. Little email back and forth, and then a phone conversation with the guy who's essentially in charge of our 50th uh, high school graduation reunion, where I'm going to see a whole lot of old people. But here was the honor. They wanted to do something on Saturday morning for those of us that are Christians and would like to, you know, do something with our faith in that moment. And so he asked me if I would, make a short presentation and pray. I that thrills me for a whole bunch of reasons. Number one, I I just think anytime I get invited to speak up on behalf of Christ, I should feel honored. And secondly, because for whatever reason, somebody thought of me to fill this role, and I'm grateful for that. Um, I I hope, okay, there's this piece of me, and I can't seem to get rid of it. But there's this piece of me that wants, when I get done, for people to go, "Whoa, now that guy, wow." Sorry, just it. I that I still want to be at the cool kids table. I can't seem to get rid of that. But there's a bigger part of me that says I want to somehow provoke, encourage, um, inspire people to know that their faith is real because God is real, and that this life that we choose to live within His design is valid. And anyway, the other thing is, I hope that my fellow classmates, and there are fewer and fewer of them all the time, I'm told that's what happens when you get older, that somehow I'll be remembered because of my faith. Uh, so anyway, here, actually, that has this kind of round the horn connection to where we are in First Timothy chapter 1, where in verse 20, Paul talks about two guys who have shipwrecked their faith. A word picture that we would, in our culture, we'd run over it pretty quickly. No, don't. Shipwrecked faith is, it's horrible. I mean, that is, it's terminal. Okay. And he cites two guys, Hymenaeus and Alexander. He says, "Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan to be taught not to blaspheme." That is interesting on lots of different levels. First of all, on one level, Paul didn't just say, we all know it. There are people out there who are not following Christ, and they are giving up their faith for things that are of little value. He didn't say that. He didn't even say people are shipwrecking their faith because they're rejecting God's design for the world and for their life in specific. They're out there. They are. You see them around you. Nope. He says, here's two guys, Hymenaeus and Alexander. My thought is, although, as I said last time, Hymenaeus shows up one other time, and evidently, within the context of, at least the context of the church in Ephesus, Hymenaeus must have somehow had a platform to influence people, to teach, to possibly to preach, or at the very least, he could speak into the life of the church or individuals. And Paul says in 2 Timothy that what Hymenaeus is preaching is simply poison. I don't know about Alexander. We really don't know. It'd be interesting, and there's a part of me that is appealed to by the idea of, I bet you could hypothesize. You could, there's a lot of scenarios you could believably write into this whole situation. I'm not going to do that, but I just want to say, Paul, imagine being either Hymenaeus or Alexander. And here's what we talked about this before. This is what usually happened when a letter from Paul was received by an individual or a church. In the gathering of the church, oh, by the way, they didn't meet in a church house. There was not a church with a spire and a steeple on the corner and a sign outside that says, we meet every Sunday at 9 o'clock and 10:30. Join us. Fellowship between. No, there wasn't such a thing. They didn't have Sunday schools. They didn't have a building. Now, did they meet in buildings? Well, yeah. Sometimes they would meet in rented halls, as was the case early in Paul's ministry in Ephesus. Often they would meet in houses. But when Timothy got this letter, he was, at that point in time, he was the leader of the church in Ephesus. He was their pastor. We might call him the senior pastor, the senior minister, whatever your particular church and tradition, whatever term they use to designate that guy. He was the guy. Imagine that he said, my friends, I've received a letter from our dear brother Paul, and it's my honor to both receive it and to read it to you here. I have a strong feeling that Hymenaeus and Alexander would have been there, and there's also this possibility, though, it's still conjecture, that their presence would not have been unnoticed by the rest of the church. Right? I think these were guys of some measure, at least, of influence. So there they were, sitting wherever they were sitting within the confines, and Paul's letter is read, and Timothy begins reading it, and I'm sure they're saying, "Well, yeah, and then Timothy gets to that some people have rejected and so have suffered shipwreck with regard to the faith. Among them are Hymenaeus and Alexander. What? Now, can you imagine? This is my imagination. I'm just sitting there. I don't think they had pews, but I'm sitting there. Probably, honestly, in the first century, houses were not furnished with lots of extra chairs. People would sit on the floor. They still do in the Middle East. Anyway, wherever I was sitting, wherever Hymenaeus and Alexander were, I'd probably go, whoa. I have no idea what they would have felt. No, that's not true. I have an idea. Here's my idea. I think we would have felt, first, a flush of humiliation, and second, quickly after that, a flush of rage. Now, we do not know. Anything that I have to say about this is on pure conjecture level. I wonder, did they stop it and go, whoa, wait, that says I deserve an opportunity to defend myself? I don't know, maybe they did. Well, I suppose there's even a possibility that by the time this letter reached Timothy, Hymenaeus and Alexander would have decided that what's happening here in this fellowship, we're not interested anymore, and they may have pulled out. I do not know. But whatever. It's probably not a bad exercise to let your imagination kind of take this, but don't go too far with it, because that's not the point. Here's the point. Paul writes, I have handed them over to Satan to be taught not to blaspheme. See, this was not about Paul saying, they don't agree with me, and so I'm disassociating myself from them. That's not what this is. Paul's not talking about even a severe disagreement over some point of theology or doctrine or belief. He's talking about, he says, why did he turn them over to Satan? He handed them over to Satan to teach them not to blaspheme. This is, I believe, the most serious of accusations. Jesus said, every sin that a person could commit will be and can be forgiven by God, except one, Jesus said, and that is to blaspheme the Holy Spirit. Now, I looked up, what does blaspheme mean? It means to attribute to, it is a completely religious term. It wasn't in Paul's day, completely a religious term that has to do with assigning a characteristic to God that is clearly not his, or casting a disparage against God. So this is not like, well, I just don't think God works that way. I think he works this way. This is not about, are you going to be a predestinationist or are you going to be a free will? That's not what this is about. This is about saying, whatever the exact phrase was, we don't even know, but they were attributing things to God that were not of God. They were not consistent with his character, with his revealed character, and they were disparaging who God is and how he works in the world. The only thing I can imagine is that they were trying to convince other people to join them as they resculpture and reinvent what it means to be a fully enlightened individual, or whatever term they used. So does blasphemy still happen today? I think so. I'm blessed because I've never been in a church where I felt blasphemy was happening. Now, I have been in churches where people had some pretty screwed up ideas and pretty wacky, but they weren't blasphemous. All right, so it probably still happens. I have some pretty strong opinions about a few people that have the spotlight attention. I mean, that one or two of them are in the category of celebrity pastors. I don't have this apostolic awareness that Paul had to be able to call them out. But he says he turned them over to Satan. That is no small thing. So that they would be taught not to blaspheme. Paul didn't feel like he had to teach them not to. I wonder, my thought is, I think Paul would have tried to reason with them, confront them and reason with them. I don't think they would have listened. And I think that's why Paul resorted to this extreme measure of turning them over to Satan. How horrible would that be? Well, in my opinion, there's even one thing more horrible. Evidently, Hymenaeus didn't really give a rip. All right, let's pick it up next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.